First up, in the last week, 12,000 migrants arrived on the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa, more than doubling its population in one day. As European leaders panic, is this only just the beginning? For the cover piece this week, Christopher Caldwell takes a look at what is to come. He joins me now, along with our columnist Douglas Murray, who writes in his column this week about how little has changed since 2015, the last time he was in Lampedusa. Douglas and Chris, welcome to Spectator TV. Douglas, take us back to 2015 when you went to Lampedusa. That was at the beginning of what we now call the migrant crisis. What did you see?
That's right. I went there for the Spectator, as it happens, 8 years ago now. And at that point, the island, which had about 6,000 inhabitants, was getting a lot of boats coming. I think just at the time I was there were 1,200 people in the asylum center there. They were trying to get the people straight off as fast as possible off the island up to Sicily into mainland Italy. And this was something I then ended up seeing in other places, as Christopher has in the Isle of Lesbos, in other islands across Greece. And that summer, of course, more than 1 million people came illegally into Europe. And Europe buckled, but was told effectively by its political leaders that this was a sort of one-off. And I knew that was absolute nonsense. What had been happening on Lampedusa had been happening at a lesser extent for some years. And it was clear that a kind of cordon had broken. And I think what we've seen this past week, is a demonstration of that.
Well, Chris, tell us about what has happened in the last couple of weeks, because you've written about it in our cover article this week.
Well, basically, you've had a steady volume of traffic to Lampedusa, as Douglas says. But over the course of about 5 days last week, Lampedusa got 11 or 12,000 people, which totally overwhelmed that detention center in the middle of the island that Douglas was talking about, and have actually overwhelmed public transport and the public transport on other islands as well, and turned it into a bit of a political crisis for Giorgia Meloni's government. Meloni is a politician who sort of alarmed a lot of European journalists when she came to power a year ago, because she's descended from the kind of Mussolini-friendly part of the Italian right. But in fact, over the course of the past year, she's ruled in a very, very moderate, and I would even say a center-left and pro-European way. And so she's reached a point now where the main threat to her domestically is from her actual base, from people who don't believe she's been, let's say, conservative or nationalistic enough. And that, in turn, is sort of that is being noticed in other European countries, which are beginning to have their own immigration discussions.
And Chris, I want to talk a little bit more about the political ramifications in just a second, but why is it that there's been such a huge wave in the last couple of weeks? Is it because of the natural disasters, the floods, the earthquakes that's been happening in North Africa? Is there something of a breaking point? What's happened?
I don't think it's the flood in Libya, although I do think Libya is the key. Douglas spoke of a cordon being breached, in 2015 in terms of behavior. I think in the case of Lampedusa, the important breach of the cordon came in 2011 with the Euro-American invasion of Libya. Now, people were very impatient with Muammar Gaddafi. There were reasons to be impatient with him, but he had kept the immigration pressures from Africa pretty well bottled up. There's very little regulation of these flows now. It's very catch as catch can. The Italians they've been in negotiations with the Libyan Coast Guard. It's just very irregular. And so why were there 11,000 people this week? I don't exactly know, but it may just have to do with the scheduling of the people who are trafficking these people, or with something going on deeper in Africa. But I think that it's the anarchy in Libya. If you had to name one factor, The proximate cause would be the anarchy in Libya, and the larger cause is the absolutely unbelievable demographic growth in Africa.
And Douglas, I thought your column in this week also on this topic was very interesting because you talk about why politicians haven't managed to fix this in the 8 years since you went to Lampedusa. I mean, we've had, migration has been top of the agenda for a lot of people and for political discourse in Europe. You've written a book about it. You've got people like Maloney who come into government on this platform. So why can politicians like her not fix it?
Well, as Chris has said, and Chris has written a book about this as well, I mean, it's been a long simmering issue in Europe, and I'd argue the wider West. It's the same issue America is facing at its southern border. Modern democratic nation states seem to find it hard to defend their borders, certainly in Europe and North America. The interesting thing is, as you mentioned, that there is serious public worry about this, as there is in Britain with the small boats coming across the channel that keep breaking records. In Britain, our politicians say this is our number one priority and we're going to deal with it, and then they don't. Georgia Maloney's number one priority says she wants to deal with it, then she doesn't. And the sort of online know-alls and sort of some of the conspiracy types at this point say, aha, she's been completely bought. She's become a shill of the EU and so on. I don't actually have much time for Maloney. She doesn't have very much time for me either. She's not my type of politician. But I was very struck when she came in. I thought, okay, well, there's one thing she's really going to be tested on. And so far, she's failed. There she was in Lampedusa this week, alongside Ursula von der Leyen. And once again, Maloney is an Italian prime minister saying, we are taking too much strain in Italy. The EU is not doing enough. And I think, wow, how many years have I heard that for? It's still true, but it still has to be said. And the real explanation, I think, or one of the explanations that I give in my column, and I think hasn't been pointed out enough, is look at what has happened to some of her rivals. Look at what's happened to Matteo Salvini, who was Interior Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. He's technically a sort of ally of Maloney's, but also, of course, a rival. Salvini actually did manage to slow down the boats landing in Lampedusa and Sicily. How did he do it? Among other things, by simply forbidding them permission to land. And that included NGO ships. And this is very important because it's not just the smuggling networks in the Mediterranean. The smuggling networks work with some NGOs to test the nation state's borders. And there were NGO ships off the coasts of Italy, and Matteo Salvini refused to allow them to land. Now, what has happened since? It's true that the flow of migrants reduced, but Salvini has been twice prosecuted, including by an overwhelming vote in the Italian Senate to prosecute him for what? Kidnapping was the title. Kidnapping the people on the boats by refusing to allow illegal migrants to land. So I give that example. Very quickly, I'll give another example. Inga Støjberg, who Denmark was very lucky to have as their integration minister in 2015 till 2019. Inga Støjberg was the most important figure to make sure that Denmark did not make the mistake Sweden did in 2015 and take in hundreds of thousands of people they then couldn't integrate. So Denmark didn't do that, largely because of Inga Støjberg. What has Inga Støjberg's reward been for keeping her country's borders secure? She has been prosecuted in Denmark. She was sentenced to prison for effectively defending the borders of Denmark. She had to wear an ankle bracelet. So when Maloney or any other European politician of right or left is looking at this, if you do the wrong thing and you make sure that you just allow a constant flow of illegals into your country, you will retire fine. You will be on NGO boards, you'll be on bank boards, you'll be just fine. If you do the right thing and enforce your country's borders, you are likely, very likely, to face the rest of your life in the courts.
Well, Douglas, on that lawfare is clearly incredibly concerning, especially for democratically elected politicians. But, to Chris's point about the underlying causes, things like the 2011 military intervention in Libya, how much can these politicians really have fixed it? These suggestions, for example, like the Rwanda plan, all of these different policies which sound, on paper dramatic, but how much can that really fix what's, something of a structural problem here? Don't you think that actually by blaming it on lawfare, actually we're giving these politicians a bit too much credit? Maybe they couldn't have fixed it anyway.
Well, I think they could. I don't see why it's impossible to enforce the law. I mean, we enforce the law on lots of other things. It's extremely difficult to get to a country like America or Britain legally. Why is it so wildly easy to get into it illegally? And I'm sorry, it is easy. Everyone talks about the perilous journey. You only have to spend a few hours in a boat. It only costs a few $1,000s. It's very easy. You walk straight in and you've got a hotel. And then you'll get a work permit as well. The legal route is extremely difficult. The illegal one has become easy. I'm sorry, politicians can sort that out. I don't think it's the world's hardest Rubik's Cube.
Chris, what do you think? And also on that point about legal versus illegal routes, people often say if you gave them more legal routes, if you could properly separate those fleeing political persecution, fleeing war and famine from those who are just looking for, economic migration, then actually the public will be more on side. What about that argument?
That's very, very hard to do. And I there was a good article in Il Foglio, which is an Italian newspaper this week by a writer named Giancarlo Loquenzi. And he talked about this shibboleth that all immigration politicians, all politicians who talk about immigration, they say that the real solution to this problem is to develop Africa, to give migrants more opportunities in the places where they are. I think that if that were easy to do, I think the private sector would be looking into ways of doing it. The fact is, Europe is where you connect to the global economy. There's not. It's going to be. It would take a very, very long time. Longer than the next generation to create such an infrastructure abroad. Even if it were possible, you're talking about building up an economy in an entire other continent, which Europe has very few resources now to spend on its own. I just don't see how that is possibly going to happen. So it becomes a question of, actually, one hates to talk this way, it becomes a question of defending the border, of just sort of physically keeping people from crossing that border. And that is a military problem. It's not a courtroom problem or something. You just have to create physical obstacles to passing. And in that, we have a kind of an underlying philosophical problem. We have a kind of our governing classes, and generally this is in most countries, this is as true of the putatively conservative party as it is of the putatively progressive party. There's an allergy to thinking of politics this way, as this sort of like the use of force to keep people from doing one thing or another. And there's another dimension to it, which is that the rhetoric surrounding human rights is very hard to confine to the rhetoric of citizenship. So human rights rhetoric tends to work against Republican rhetoric. It tends to, it's very hard to sort of like establish that citizens have these rights, and then to answer the question of, well, okay, if the people on your street have the right to walk freely, why don't the people in this other country? It's a complex argument, but until we're clear, but as long as we're not clear on it, it's very easy to game the system.
Can I add one thing to that, Cindy, which is absolutely agree with what Chris just said, but the argument that you need to improve the economies of Africa before you can solve this problem. First of all, I mean, it's like, just, will it ever happen in anyone's lifetime? Who knows? Are you willing to sacrifice the future of Europe to that? Personally, not. But secondly, it's a fallacy. Theresa May used to say this during the migration crisis. She used to say, we need to work at improving the economies in the countries people are coming from. Flat out wrong. You can improve the economies, nice thing to do, good thing for those people. That doesn't solve the migration problem. In fact, a lot of the evidence shows if the lifestyle of the people in a particular country rises in Africa slightly, you get more migrants coming to Europe because they have the means to come to Europe. So this is all built on a set of massive fallacies. And to paraphrase something David Goodhart said some years ago, we in Europe in particular, but America as well, have made two massive miscalculations that are generational. The first is we have massively underestimated the number of people who want to come. And in sub-Saharan Africa alone, that is just a bottomless number of people. So we have massively underestimated the number of people who want to come to our countries, and we have massively overestimated our ability to integrate them. It's a joke that the people... This is what I realized when I first was on Lampedusa. It's a joke to think that these people are going to soon become Milanese Italians or Florentine Italians, and they're going to meld into the culture of Dante and Boccaccio and much more. It's a joke. They won't. Their lives will be very miserable in Italy. They will be in a criminal underclass gang world where at best they will be selling illegal handbags on bridges in Venice and running from the police when they come. The idea that this is the next generation of Europeans is for the birds.
I don't think that intervention to make Africa more wealthy is something that the West should be engaging with. And as Chris has suggested, in some ways, intervention was the very first problem in the first place. But Douglas, where do you draw that line when it comes to integration? Because do you think it's a volumes problem? Do you think that some cultures inherently find it difficult to integrate? Because in the magazine this week, I also have a piece out talking about the 125,000 Hong Kongers who have come to the UK in the last 2 years. Now, what I find from meeting them is that they tend to be, 70% of them have university degrees. Many of them already speak English. They come having sold their Hong Kong flats immediately on the housing ladder here. Do you think that integration is a problem for them too? Or what is the difference here that we're talking about?
There's about three things that really matter in immigration. There is the speed, there is the numbers, and there's the identity. And that's pretty much it. If you do a difficult identity to integrate, but you do it incredibly slowly, you can just about cope. Do an identity that's hard to integrate fast and in large numbers, it's not going to work. The interesting case you give of the Hong Kongers is, of course, many of these people, apart from, as you say, they've got university degrees. I'm afraid that the random flow of people across the southern border of America or across the soft underbelly of Europe, you're not dealing with people who are massively overeducated. I'm sorry to say, but it's fact. The idea that they speak the languages of Europe, again, no, and it's difficult and it's much more difficult than it is for somebody from Hong Kong. Thirdly, people from Hong Kong, as you know, Cindy, many of them have grown up effectively under a British system of law, among other things. That it's not so it's not the hardest bit to fit into the jigsaw. In the same way, there are many people in America who are in favor of a sort of lax immigration policy in America as compared to Europe, because they say, well, look, it's Hispanics, they're Christians almost entirely. They can fit into our culture. Actually, Central and Southern Americans don't immediately integrate into American culture that easily, but it's a better fit than a Muslim Nigerian trying to fit into France in the 21st century. And again, these are just such obvious things, but we've made such baby steps in recent years of even acknowledging them that we can't recognize, again, speed, numbers, identity. And the ones people want to speak about least is identity.
And Chris, just finally then, we all know what's happened to European politics in the last 8 years when this crisis has not got better, it's only got worse. You write in your piece about the very many different political shake-ups, from Trump to Brexit to various kind of right-wing politicians across the continent. You also write concerningly that the migrant crisis may only just be starting, that actually this current wave is going to shake European politics to its core. What do you think is going to happen from here?
Well, it just has to do with the size. I think that of the things that Douglas was just talking about, the key thing is the size. If suddenly 1% of Florence were made up of migrants, it probably wouldn't matter where in the world they were from. Over time, they could be assimilated. But the numbers involved, particularly when you go from one side of the Mediterranean to the other, are extraordinary. So this collapse of birth rates, which we've seen in Europe probably over the last 50 years, it tends to reflect itself in aging. It tends to be camouflaged for a very long time. It takes about a couple of generations before that you start to see it in the rate of population replacement. But we're at that point now. And each successive European generation is about a third smaller than the last, or at least in a country like Italy. And then in Africa, you have a situation where the continent is just exploding with population, particularly south of the Sahara. You have there were about 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa at the end of the colonial era, say in 1960, and by mid-century there's going to be over 2 billion. That is, from now until mid-century, there's going to be a doubling of population, and that means you have a lot of people trying to fit into an economy that doesn't have room for them, and they're young, they're dynamic, they're on the move, and so we're only at the beginning of that population growth. So yes, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
But Chris, if our population is shrinking, then we do have space for them in the economy.
Well, it's not a question of just what you have space for. I mean, it's a question of the kind of society you want to have. When you talk about the numbers, these are large enough numbers to become the culture of Europe. I mean, you want to. I assume that one wants to perpetuate the culture of Europe rather than just sort of like trade it off for another one.
Don't assume that, Chris. Don't assume that.
Yeah. No. All right. Well,
I think that is such a rich topic for pickings for another conversation. But I'm afraid we've run out of time there. Douglas Murray, Chris Caldwell, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV.
Thank you.